On today's podcast, we sat down with legendary record producer Mike Clink, who is known for his great work with Jefferson Starship, UFO, Michael Schenker, Heart, Eddie Money, Megadeth, and of course, the first 5 Guns N' Roses albums. We discuss his time as a recording engineer, what he learned from working with the great producers over all those years, how to work with acts, what is his criteria in the studio for what he looks for in talent, and many, many, many other aspects about his very incredible career. You're not going to want to miss it. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down and spoke with the legendary record producer Mike Clink, who is known for his great work with Jefferson Starship, UFO, Michael Schenker, Heart, Eddie Money, Megadeth, and of course, the first 5 Guns N' Roses albums. We discuss what his time as an engineer taught him as a producer, the importance of interpersonal communication skills when working with artists, and what are the non-creative qualities he looks for in the acts he chooses to work with, working in live sound, and much, much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source, serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
What do UFO, Michael Schenker, Heart, Eddie Money, Jefferson Starship, Megadeth, and one of the most seminal rock albums of all time, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, all have in common? Our featured guest, record producer extraordinaire, Mike Clink. It was a really, really great interview and conversation with him. We talked a lot about his career as a producer, what he learned from some of the great producers that he worked with, coming up. I loved that thing, Eric, when he talked about all the non-creative qualities that he looks for in talent that he wants to work with. And also for you people who want to be producers, some of the technical side we got into and how he chooses studios that he wants to work with, among other things.
Yeah. Some of the things that I picked up from this interview, which was amazing, was, his transitioning, because early on he was an engineer and producer. He engineered and produced that Appetite for Destruction album.
Yes.
And him transitioning out of that and just to become a producer. And then also moving from analog to digital, because he was during that transition going from an analog world into digital. And one of the other things that I thought was interesting, because he does have such a diverse skill set, him transitioning into live television. He did a lot with the Super Bowls and a lot of football games and a lot of sporting events. And that's a whole different other level of skills.
It's a whole different skill set. Exactly. There's no fixing anything in that world. That's a world that's live. And when it's done, and you live with what, you've done. It's gone.
Exactly. So Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Mike Clink.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
The first question I want to ask you is a two-parter, and that is, when did you know that music was going to be your career path? And the second part is, did it choose you or did you choose it?
Well, the first part of that question is, I knew I wanted to make records from the time I was in junior high. I used to spend all my disposable income buying records, sneaking them into the house, and then going down into my room and analyzing them and listening to them, trying to understand the intricacies of the sounds, the sonics, the performances. So I knew at a very early age that I wanted to make records and be in the studio. And the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's was an epiphany for me. That just blew my mind. And, I played in bands. I was first chair, first trumpet, but I never wanted to be in a band, in a rock band. I always wanted to make the record. So I knew at a very early age, and I think that's unusual when I talk to people about their career path. I don't think as many people know at that early age that they want to make records. I mean, maybe they want to be in a band, but, for someone to be behind the scenes, I think that might be a little unusual. So in that instance, the second part of the question is, I chose the career. I chose that path. I mean, I was always immersed in music. My mother was very musical, and I was surrounded by music. But, it's a path that I chose. I mean, I went to college to appease, my parents, but it's not really what I wanted to do. So the first opportunity that I had to kind of get into the music business on a bigger scale, that's what I did.
This is Eric, by the way, and I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. It's a real honor having you on the show with us today. I wanted to ask you more of going back to the beginning for you. When you moved to California from Illinois, you knew Joe Walsh. How did that relationship begin between you two?
Well, I had one of my very best friends from junior high all the way through high school, moved out here and became an assistant at a company called Heller Fischel. And through that, at one time, Joe walked through the doors and they developed a relationship, and, they started dating. And, I was always staying in touch with Jody. And then one time when Joe was on the road, I was still living in Illinois. He came to play in Springfield, Illinois. I went to the show, we hit it off and, expressed my interest in moving to California. I think Jody was my advocate and told him that, could we help Mike out? So, he agreed and gave me the opportunity to come out here, and he put a roof over my head and, gave me several opportunities to work at different places. And the one place that I wanted to work was the record plant, and he made the introduction to Chris Stone, and I just got my foot in the door, and that's how I started.
Now what a wonderful entry that was. I mean, you started at one of the great facilities, of which there were a lot of back then in this town. But to get that opportunity to do that's a wonderful environment to have worked. But my question is that, I also believe that you had the opportunity during that time to see the Eagles record some of Hotel California. And I'm curious as to what did that opportunity show you?
Well, I was not the official assistant engineer on that recording, but my relationship with Joe, I got to be friends with a lot of the crew guys and Bill Szymczyk. And back in those days, you were not able to get into an Eagles session, they kept that studio under lock and key. It was amazing. They were the first people I knew that ever had a lockout on a studio, because I was working at the record plant, and typically in one room, and they had 4 of them, they would do 3 to 4 sessions a day. What was unusual is that the Eagles booked the whole studio and had a lockout. In fact, they put a padlock on the studio at the end of the evening every day. So I realized that I was very lucky to be able to be witness to some of those sessions. I wasn't there for the vocals or the tracking, but some of the I was there definitely for all the strings that they were putting on the sessions, and was able to sit down with Bill and Bruce Hensel, who was working on the session, and talk to them about how they were making their record and their approach to the record. So it was a really special situation that I was able to sit in on a couple of those sessions.
Mike, you've worked with a lot of producers during your years as an engineer. What were the greatest lessons or insights that you learned about being a great record producer?
Well, what I learned is what to do and what not to do. As I said, the record plant had 4 studios in Los Angeles. They had 2 studios or 3 studios in Sausalito, and they had 4 remote trucks. They had a studio on a boat. So there were a lot of situations that I could be witness to, and all of those situations were with different people. And I finally got locked into different producers or producers that I would work with for an extended period of time. I worked with Bruce Botnick and Andy Johns for 4 records, and then I started working with Ron Nevison, and I did many records with Ron and became his engineer, and so it enabled me. But I literally worked on probably 200 records in that time, and maybe not from start to finish, but 200 projects, doing a lot of different things. So I sat behind so many talented people, and I learned what worked and what didn't work. And I kind of took those ideas and the things that I saw and kind of made them my own. And that's what you do. And nowadays, people don't have that opportunity to work behind that many people and kind of develop kind of a mentorship where you can sit behind someone and someone actually walks you through it. Nowadays, you sit down and you hit the ground running and just start as soon as you open up the box or go to a studio. So I would say that, I learned the good and the bad, and I threw out the bad and kept the good.
In listening to you, it's interesting because you're speaking about your own experience as an engineer working with all of these producers. And I'm curious, can you speak to how intertwined the role of the engineer and the producer is today?
I think nowadays it's extremely intertwined. In fact, more than likely, it's one and the same. During the days when I started, everybody had a designed role. You had an assistant engineer, you had an engineer, and then you had a producer, and maybe you had a co-producer, and then you had the band. So everyone had a particular job to do. Now, the producer could have been an engineer. In the case of Ron Nevison, he started out as an engineer, became a producer, and the same thing happened with me. I kind of morphed from being an engineer into the production part of it. But as the years went by for me, I kind of gave up and focused more on the production as opposed to the engineering part of it. But nowadays, I think because of the budgets, you have to be able to do multitask. You have to do so many things, and that's on the technical and aspect of it, and also the creative aspect of it. I think that now more than ever they are one and the same, and probably add to that an arranger, a songwriter, a publisher. There's so many different facets that you need to be aware of that. Back in the day, I pretty much had blinders on. I wanted to be the best engineer possible because that was my goal. But then you say to yourself, well, now I've really hit the ground running. I'm really doing well as an engineer. Now I want to branch out and become a producer. So that's pretty, in a nutshell, that's the long answer actually to your question.
Well, that leads us to the next, to my next question for you is, did you make a conscious decision? You kind of alluded to it a little bit there in that last answer, but did you make a conscious decision to start producing rather than continuing to engineer?
Well, when I first started, it was a transition into production without giving up the engineering aspect of it, because for the first probably 20 or 30 of my productions, I was actually the engineer. And, to back up a little bit, I always set goals for myself. I set a goal for myself. I started out at the record plant answering phones, and it was nice to be in the studio, but I knew that wasn't a career. So I learned everything on my own as far as how to run the equipment on my time off and became a great assistant engineer. And then after being a great assistant engineer and working behind some of the best of the best, I said, well, now I want to become a full-fledged engineer. And at the time at the record plant, Chris had this mantra that when you left the record plant and went out on your own, you couldn't come back. So you had to be pretty confident in your skills and knowing also that you had some clients to back it up, and if you were willing to take that step. I had many opportunities as an engineer working at the record plant and working behind some of the producers that I had worked with to produce or co-produce some of the records that I was working on. But, I wasn't hired as the producer, so I didn't step into that role. I was asked to produce some of the biggest acts in the world as an engineer, but oddly enough, I turned them down because I felt as if I wasn't ready. And my being very goal-oriented and knowing that I didn't want to fail, I didn't want to get into a situation where I would not be able to deliver what the artist wanted me to deliver. So I turned down many, many acts that were huge signed acts to labels because I knew I wasn't ready. But once I made that step into production, I felt comfortable walking into a room with absolutely anybody as in the role of the producer and deliver the goods.
When you talk about not being ready, I'm curious, are you speaking about the fact that you consciously felt that you didn't have the skill sets yet? You didn't have the experience? Was it a confidence issue? Was it all of the above? What specifically was present in those feelings that obviously, changed when you did accept your first production gigs?
Well, when I was offered some of those gigs, I think I was a really good, a really great engineer, and I had really good people skills. However, I didn't feel that they wanted to hire me for my production skills. And that's what I wanted people to hire me for. The fact that I would be able to add something to the music as opposed to the technical aspect of just making their music sound good. It wasn't that I didn't have the confidence. I just felt that I didn't have I hadn't completed my education, so to speak, and felt that I was ready to get into that role. Because, I always feel that, if I'd have gotten into that situation and I'd have failed, then that would have been the black mark on my career from that point forward. So I wanted to get into a situation where I wouldn't fail. That's what you want to do all the time, is put yourself in a position where you limit the percentage of the opportunity to fail, and your opportunities to succeed outweigh those.
Well, in hearing your answer, I'm curious then, what are the specific qualities in your mind that make a great producer?
That's the question that we could spend probably 12 hours on. But
okay, we'll make this a 12-parter then, Mike.
Yeah, well, and listen, you speak to a lot of different producers, so you know that each producer has their strengths and weaknesses, and
right.
And what makes a great producer is knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are before they get into a situation. For instance, I would interview with a lot of different artists, and I would hear them out and listen to them, and I would listen to their music, and I would figure out if I could actually add value to their music. And if I felt that I wasn't going to add value to their music, then I would say, hey guys, I'm not the right person for this project. I can point you in a direction to someone or multiple people that would be able to help you and deliver the goods for you. Another strength of a producer is understanding what the vision of the artist is. Sometimes an artist doesn't even understand what their vision is when they first get into this. I have worked with many different artists that I just had a gut feeling that what they wanted to do wasn't exactly what they were presenting me at the moment, and that they were kind of spoon feeding me what they thought I wanted to hear, and the type of material that they wanted me to hear. And I said, this isn't really you. What do you really like to do? What do you really like to listen to? And then through that conversation, you understand where they really are. as far as artists. And, it's communication. I mean, you have to be able to communicate and to be able to understand and guide that artist and deliver to them their vision combined with your vision on where you think that they should go. Because, I think that the best producers are able to morph and bring out the best in different artists, as opposed to someone who just does it their way and it's my way or the highway. And, it becomes a bit of a cookie cutter process. I think that all my productions, if you listen to them, they're all different, and they sonically sound different, and it's different genres and different types of rock and pop, and being able to do that, I think, makes a good producer.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Ritch, you're the founder, CEO, legend of Music Business Registry. Tell us what the Music Business Registry is all about.
Well, what it's about, Eric, is it's a company that is designed to provide the most accurate and up-to-date contact information for the music business. So if someone is looking to reach the A&R community, if someone is looking to reach music publishers, if someone needs to reach artist managers, if someone needs to reach music attorneys, if someone's looking to place their music into film and television and needs to reach all the music supervisors, that's the contact information that we provide. We've been doing it for 28 years. We're sort of the industry standard, if you will, for the music business, and have been serving them since 1992. So that's what we do.
Amazing. So if I wanted to find out, let's say A&R people from Warner Brothers, let's say, I can just go in there and find that in the A&R registry?
Absolutely. You'll find all of the Warner Brothers in there. You'll find the Warner Brothers in LA, Warner Brothers in New York, Warner Brothers in Nashville, Warner Brothers in London, Warner Brothers, probably in Australia as well. So those are the main territories that we cover.
Amazing. And we're offering all of our insiders right now that are listening, if you visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount off your first order. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. Anything else you want to say, Ritch?
Well, when you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Well, speaking of great producers, you've spoken about the influence that great producers like Bill Szymczyk and Andy Johns, Peter Asher, Bruce Botnick, and Rod Nevison had on you. What was it in particular about those producers?
I gleaned something from each of those people. And as I said before, it was also the good and the bad. Just because they were the great producers doesn't mean that I did everything like they did. I saw how they interacted with artists and said, I don't really feel good about doing it that way. That's not the way I would handle a situation or go about the recording process. But what really those guys were all great at doing was recording on the fly. In other words, they had a plan A, they had a plan B, and they had a plan C. So if something didn't work, they were always moving on to the next way to solve that problem, whether it was a performance or whether it was a sonic issue. And that's, thinking on their feet and moving quickly. That's something that I really admired from all of those people, that they were able to, to have multiple ways to attack a situation in the studio. And nowadays, I find that some of these engineers and producers get bogged down in if something doesn't work, they will work on it for hours trying to fix it, when actually a fix is not the best way to go about it. It's probably a new approach.
Interesting. One of the things that it was interesting to hear you speak about in the answer you just gave, Mike, is the whole aspect of how you would watch and observe certain behavior in these producers. Can you speak to how important are a producer's people skills when working with artists?
Well, it's extremely important. I mean, once you have the material and you've selected the material, once you have done the arrangements, and once you've worked on the lyrics and the melody, it's all people skills at that point, because what you're trying to do is to get the best performances out of the musicians that you're working with, and to be able to get those performances from these people. I mean, that's all it is people skills, and being able to talk to them and help to build their confidence, and let them know that they can conquer all of their demons. And it's difficult to put yourself out there, and no one wants to put themselves in a situation where they feel uncomfortable. So my job is to make them feel as comfortable as possible, to get them to perform to the best of their ability, and actually raise the bar and make them better than what they are, or what they think they can do in the studio.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that question that Ritch just said, do those qualities depend on the specific needs of the artist?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some people need more hand holding than others. And it's all about timing as well. It's about understanding when to approach someone about an idea that you have. I mean, sometimes, as I said, it's all timing. And those are the things that you learn. I mean, when I go into the studio with someone and go into rehearsal with the band, I spend a couple of days getting to know the band, and I learn what their strengths and weaknesses are as a band. If I see some problems with a drummer, I don't call him out in front of the whole band. Maybe after the rehearsal, I'll pull them aside and say, I think that you need to work on this. I think you need to do this. And so, understanding the specific needs of each individual in that band is very important. And to add on to that is not to play favorites. When you're working in a band situation, it's different with a solo artist, but in a band situation, which is a lot of the records that I do, is that, you don't play favorites. I don't care who wrote the song. I don't care who's singing it, who's performing on it. I just want the best for the song, because ultimately, the better the song does, the more success the band is going to have.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like you're a manager in that sense, that you have to play to everybody's strengths and weaknesses. You're like the psychologist, the mother, because I mean, there's some issues that do come up in the studio where if somebody can't do a performance, they can't, that's kind of like a thing that you have to kind of temper in a certain way to not come across or to offend the person, or, so it's a very crucial skill set, I think, for you that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I give everybody the opportunity to succeed. And it's only at the point when I know that what I'm asking them to do won't work, I either have to lower my expectations, which I absolutely do not like to do, or have a plan B ready to go. I try to make it easy. As I said before, I always have the plan A, the plan B, and the plan C ready to go, because ultimately I want them to feel good about the project. I don't want to rip it out of their hands and take the project away from them, which, in this day and age, I can easily do. I can create these performances from, because we have the technology to be able to do it. But, I'm reticent to do that. I really want them to succeed on their own, which brings up another issue. And that is that, the artist has to want it more than I do. I want every record that I do to be a success, and I want the artist, to care as much about the project as I do. But sometimes I find an artist coming to me and saying, well, I can't do it. You fix it. You do it. And that's something that I don't like to hear, because as an artist, that's what you do. You are there to perform and to bring your skills to the forefront in a project.
It's so interesting hearing you say that, because I often wonder, when you're taking on a project, Mike, and somebody's coming to you who you don't know, and you love the music. I'm curious, can you talk about the non-creative qualities that you, Mike Clink, look for in artists or bands that you're considering working with?
Boy, that's tough, but obviously, there has to be a bit of confidence from the artist. I mean, that you do have a shy and reserved artist, but they have to be able to exude some level of confidence to me and to be able to communicate to me what they actually want and expect from a production from me. They have to be clear on what they want, as far as what their goals are on the record. People skills. I go around and I speak to a lot of kids all the way from, the sixth grade all the way to, adults, talking to them about what it is that makes an artist successful, because you can be the most talented individual and artist in the world, but if you cannot tell people why that they should be listening to your music and be able to articulate that, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to be able to look someone in the eye and to be able to exude a bit of confidence and talk about your music. You can't why should I listen to your music? Oh, because it's good. It sounds really good. That's not an answer. You have to be able to affect people on an emotional level and not a superficial level.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Let me ask you, Mike, what are your favorite aspects of the record making process?
I enjoy working with new artists. I mean, obviously I enjoy working with, big artists and legacy artists. But I enjoy working with young bands a lot of times on the debut record, because they're just sponges. They just take it all in, and you're able to work with them and help shape their careers, in a great way. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I mean, that's kind of what I look for.
No, absolutely, it does.
I would imagine, too, just following up on Eric's question, that's a different process, I would think. I mean, when you're making the third or fourth album with someone, there's almost like creatively and just, the relationship-wise, I would think there can be a shortcut, to that. But with somebody who's new, there is that, absorption that you're talking about, that willingness to, they've never made a record before. I would also think that the process for you as a producer is different if you're working with somebody who's never ever made records before, because everything in that process is maybe old hat to you, but brand new and fresh to them.
Right. And the thing of it is that, a lot of artists, when they're working on their fourth or fifth record, they're locked into the way that they like to do it. And they're, more hesitant to try things, because they go, well, this has worked for me in the past. And I always tell people, if I have an idea, it may not work, but at least try it, and I find that new bands are certainly more excited to try new things as opposed to an artist that's been in the studio 4 or 5 times. I mean, that's why I really love the Beatles and the Police, because every record, you never knew what to expect. It was always something different. They were always willing to try new things. And I think sometimes people get locked into making the same record over and over and over. And that's not what I'm going to do. I want to kind of, bring them out of their comfort zone and get them to try things that they wouldn't necessarily try before. And new bands obviously are willing to try almost everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It's an entirely different kind of process, I would think. Let me ask you, you've touched on the process in terms of making the records. I want to break this down a little bit from your perspective. How important is pre-production to you when you're working with a band, whether it's a brand new act or whether it's a veteran?
It's absolutely essential. I really, I come from the school of there almost can't be too much pre-production. I want there to be spontaneity in the performances, and I don't need to work out every solo note for note, but I want to avoid, train wrecks in the studio. So the more comfortable they are with the arrangements, because I work on the arrangements of the songs and if they've not played it that way previously, I want them to kind of have it under their fingers, so to speak, so that it becomes second nature. So they're not thinking about the arrangement of the song or what changes I've made to the song. I want them to kind of own the new changes that we've made to the material. It gives me an opportunity to go over the melodies and the lyrics with the band. And in this day and age, with budgets unfortunately being what they are, studio time is precious. So I want to avoid the pitfalls of getting in there and then running into a wall and saying, guys, I don't know what to do. We don't, or the band saying, this is not working. I want to go in there with knowing that at least the songs are ready to go. The performances are something you never know, that you're going to be able to lock into. And that's when the skills of a producer come in to be able to get those performances. But absolutely, you cannot spend too much time. At least, a reasonable amount of time would be a week, maybe 2 weeks in pre-production, depending on the band and the material. I mean, I've spent up to a month in pre-production with a band because they just weren't ready. I mean, imagine if you're spending a month in pre-production, what it would be like if you actually got to the studio before. If you didn't go through that process.
Oh, it would be a total disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm from that school of like pre-production. And so that's great that, because I don't even know in the modern age really if that, is kind of a thing that still is done on that kind of level. Because of the advent of all the technology where you could just be making things there on the fly. So
yeah, but even then, you still want them, if it's I keep talking about in a band situation, and obviously, that's a band situation. If I'm hiring the band on my own, I mean, I'm getting the best players that Los Angeles or anywhere have to offer. And those people can do it on the fly because they've literally played on thousands and thousands of records. But in a situation where it's a band, whether it be a new band or a more of a legacy artist, the pre-production part of it is extremely important.
Right. And I would assume too, with the technical proficiency of the band members themselves, of the, what you talked about with the strength and weaknesses, and getting back to whether it's a 2-week pre-production or a month-long pre-production, I would assume has a lot to do with that as well.
Yeah. But, the thing with it is that, when bands start to, when bands do a lot of the recording on their own in the bedrooms and they can make some amazing demos, they get a little bit complacent in the way that they approach the recording. I mean, as I, alluded to earlier, I'm going to make them better musicians, so they have to want to push themselves. And the problem is that nowadays these artists know that technology can fix an issue. If something's a little out of tune, well, that's okay. You can go ahead and fix it, but I want them to perform it to the best of their ability. And I think that's what, sets some of my productions apart from other productions these days, is that, I don't like to do a cut and paste performance. I mean, I'm going for a complete performance, and I think that it shows in the actual end result.
Let me ask you, Mike, an interesting observation that I heard many producers make about modern recording technology is that with analog, you had to make choices, and today with digital, you have way too many options. Do you agree?
That can be the case, absolutely. However, I mean, with the way that I do it, I mean, I do a playlist in Pro Tools, and I get performances. I'll get a band to do 4 or 5 takes, or maybe it doesn't need that many. Sometimes I get it in 2 takes or 1 take, a great basic track, but then I'll put it together and I commit to it. I mean, if you get something from me, it's not going to have 100 tracks with maybe use this or maybe use that. I'm pretty clear. I mean, I'm pretty focused on what I want to use and what is garbage. And I don't want to have to keep, thinking about the what ifs. I want to feel good about the what I'm building on as far as the song goes as it goes along. And I'm not going to leave a whole lot of those decisions up to the end. I'm going to keep building and building the track and making it and sticking to the decisions that I've made on those performances as I go along.
I want to switch gears here for a second, and you touched on this before, but I want to expand on it a little more. You've worked with some of the great rock acts over the last 30, 40 years: the Babies, Jefferson Starship, UFO, Michael Schenker, Heart, Eddie Money, Megadeth, and of course Guns N' Roses. And I'm curious, was that by choice, or do you like to produce a wider variety of styles in your record productions?
Back when I was working with, bands like the Starship and the Babies and Eddie Money, those were all, and Heart, those were all because I was working as an engineer with Ron Nevison. So I didn't really have a choice on those things. Nowadays, when you look at some of the productions that I've done, whether it's the Guns N' Roses and the Megadeths and those projects. Those are projects that I pick, and I pick them because, I think that I can bring something to the table to make it better and to make that project better. And I don't like to do the same record over and over. I mean, if I finish a kind of a pop rock record, the next record I do is going to be something different because I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. I want to keep it interesting. Otherwise, it becomes a little boring and mundane to me. So nowadays, especially with the fact that a lot of the projects come independently of record labels, I'm going to work on something that's interesting to me at that moment. And it's all timing. I mean, if someone comes to me with a project today, I may say yes, but in a year from now or 6 months from now, I probably would have said, no, I'm not interested because I'm in a different headspace.
Mike, what's your criteria in choosing recording studios, and does it depend on the type of music that you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it depends on the music that I'm working on, and it depends on the budget because every studio has a different, caters to a different budget. And some of the bigger bands with big budgets, they don't want to go to a hole in the wall. They want to go to a place that has, the runners and the full selections of mics and a great room where you don't have to work as hard to get a great sound. But, I tailor listening to the project, I figure out what's going to work sonically and financially for the project that I'm working on. I have my favorite rooms. I love, and I love facilities like the Village and East West and the Record Plant that give you options as far as some of the sonics of each room. And depending on the console, depending on the project, I'll think about the console as part of the equation as opposed to the tracking room as well.
This next question, I have asked a lot of producers over the years, and I've never gotten a consistent answer, but every one of them has said it's an essential part of, when you commit to making a project with an artist, because especially an established artist, because it goes to the heart of how you're going to make the record. And that is, from your point of view, Mike, are there specific times that you like to work or that you prefer to work? And I ask because I know there are some people who are 9 to 5 creatures. There are some people who have families and like to be home from 7 p.m. on. There are those who like to start the process and get into the studio at 7 p.m. So, I mean, I would imagine that has to be established when you're taking on a project. What's your preference in terms of your work habits?
It's interesting, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it and a lot of ways to answer that question. It's definitely not the first thing that we talk about. I want to get comfortable with the band and the material. And then when we get into before we go to the studio, I mean, I do have hours that I like to work. I mean, I like to start anywhere from 10 or 11 in the morning and I'll go as long as I'm productive. Now, that typically means, a good 8 to 10 hour day, sometimes a 12-hour day. And if I'm starting at, 10 o'clock in the morning, I don't want to go much past 10 o'clock at night because turning around. Listen, I've worked 3 days straight. I mean, I have worked with insomniacs that when you have the moment and the time to, capture that magic, you don't want to go home. You're not going to say, okay, guys, I'm a little bit tired. I will suck it up and go as long as possible. I mean, as I get older, I'm less likely to take on projects that will, that people want to work around the clock for 3 days straight. But, I've had people that perform better at 10 o'clock in the morning and people that start at better at noon or 1 o'clock. So I'll work with that. I don't like starting, at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, I'm just not. I mean, I stay up late, but that's not my work ethic to start, at that late hour. I've done it, but it's not where I want to go now. I mean, I've had artists say that they want to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not good at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I can't, I'm going to tell them I can't do it at 8 o'clock in the morning because that's not where you're going to get the best from me. So we need to work together to find a time that works for all of us. And I think that's pretty much the key. What works best for everyone.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let me ask you, Mike, before you produced the Guns N' Roses debut album, Appetite for Destruction, you produced the demos for them, but weren't the first choice to produce the album. Can you tell us the process you went through before you landed the job?
Well, I don't know where you heard that I did the demos for them, because I didn't do the demos that came to me for the project.
Okay.
I thought you had. I thought you, okay.
No, they came to me. They had been in the studio with 3 other producers. And, I think that the record label and Tom Zutaut had probably, Geffen Records, they had, and Alan Niven, they had exhausted so many possibilities financially and emotionally that they were beat, but they weren't willing to give up on the project because they knew that it was something special. So I came in as the 4th guy to go in the studio with them. I mean, they had done, they played me the recordings that they had done with other people, but on that first record, the songs had already been written.
Right. And what was it about the 4 previous producers? Was it just they weren't getting the right sound, or the performances weren't there?
All of the above. I mean, no one was happy. The label wasn't happy. The band wasn't happy. The manager wasn't happy. And, they brought me in because of, your calling card is always the records that you've worked on, and, I had worked on, I had done Survivor, and they hated Survivor. They in that first meeting with the label, they said, this is not what we want. However, they said, we love the UFO stuff that you had done. So can you kind of tailor that more towards, what you're going for, what they wanted for the Guns N' Roses project. So, I was just intrigued, and I understood really what they wanted. I loved the 2 guitars playing off each other, and I knew that I could deliver what the band needed to get in order to make a successful record. I mean, and part of that was knowing when to say no.
I'm remembering a time when you were a guest in my class, and I think what I'm conflating the demos with are the, what they came to you with,
right?
Which is they came to you with these recordings. The songs were written. Did you and you were intrigued by what you heard? Did you see the potential in this material, and you knew what you could bring that was missing? I mean, when you heard it?
Well, from what I heard from the different recordings that they had played me, they were all different, because, when you hire a producer, every production is going to be different, So, like I said, if you hire me, my production is going to be different than if hire, a Keith Olsen or a Howard Benson. And all of those recordings had a different feel to them. When they explained to me what they wanted as far as the energy, it didn't have that. It didn't have that energy and I was really good at, getting performances from people. So I knew that when I went into it, that I would be able to get great performances from these guys.
And you certainly did. I mean, those performances on those songs are masterful, and it's a classic. I'm curious, can you tell us, do you remember how you felt about the album when it was fully completed and finished, you personally?
Well, listen, I think it's a kiss of death to ever predict the success of a record. But, because it's a jinx, when people are in the studio and they go, oh man, this is so good, we're going to win a Grammy. I'm
right.
Like, oh God, I wish you hadn't said that.
Exactly.
Now you're never going to win one.
Yeah.
But, there was magic there. I had worked with a lot of artists. As I said, I had probably worked on up to 200 different projects at that point, just even if it was for a short period of time. So I knew when the magic was happening in the studio because I had seen it. And that was with some of the biggest bands in the world. When I finished I would say 85% of the recording, Tom Zutaut came down and to the studio, and he and I sat there and we listened to the rough mixes that I had done. And he turned to me and he said, Mike, what do you think about this record? How many records do you think that it's going to sell? And I said, well, Tom, I really think that it's going to sell 2 million records. I really feel good about this. And back in those days, that was totally respectable. And he said, I think you're wrong. He said, I think this is going to sell 5 million records. Well, we were both wrong.
Yeah, right.
So I felt good about predicting the success of that record. The only other artist that I ever had done that with was Eddie Money on Eddie Money's first record. And I was just the assistant engineer on that very first record. And it was I just knew it. I said, this kid has got it. I mean, he had that star quality, that thing that, Clive Davis always talks about, you've got to be a star. And he had it, man. And I said, this guy's going to be successful. And in both those instances, Eddie Money and Guns N' Roses, on their very first record, their debut records, they didn't come out of the box and sell 1 million records. It was
it took a little bit of time.
It took them 9 months
to break that
for
record.
Both of those artists to actually hit. And it was the perseverance of the record label and the management standing behind their artist and pushing them to make sure that they had every opportunity to become a success. And that's what's different in today's day and age. An artist, if a label has to go 3 records deep and 3 videos deep in order to, get a record, to get an artist to some level of success, they're most likely unwilling to do that in this day and age. They're looking for for more of an instant success, which is why they why they sign artists that have had a relative bit of success on their own. Someone who's sold 20,000 records or 50,000 records. They're more willing to, take a gander at signing an artist like that.
Let me ask you, Mike, I remember an interview where you gave where you said that when you finished the album that several people you played it for didn't like the album. Did those opinions kind of cause you to second guess the work or the album, or alluding to your earlier question that you just kind of knew it was undeniable?
I knew it was undeniable. I mean, when I was in the studio with those guys and they were all playing, the hair on my arm stood up. I mean, it was just magical. And it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't believe people that were at different labels, and they would come up to me and they had heard the record before it really had maybe had been out for a week or two, and they go, God, this is the biggest piece of shit I ever heard. And
Wow.
those are the same people that a year later would come up to me because they were still at the labels, and they were going, oh man, that's the greatest record. I always loved that record.
Yeah, right.
I didn't bust their balls on it. I knew that, it was all BS, but I believed in it, and just like, Tom Zutaut and Ellen Niven believed in it. They were not, once I made the record, it was out of my hands, but they were unwilling to give up. And Eddie Rosenblatt as well. And the people at Geffen Records, they worked so hard to make that record a success. But I knew it had magic, and I never second guess anything. In answer to that question, I'm happy with every single record I've done. I never look back and go, it could have been better. A record producer has to make a record that it's the best record possible for the amount of time, talent, and financial resources that they have. And that's all you can do. So once I've exhausted all three of those things, I can't look back and say, oh, it could have been better, because I've used every single ounce of those three resources to make the record that I have, and I don't look back.
Mike, I want to switch gears here for a minute and talk about another aspect that we haven't addressed yet with your career, which is that, unbeknownst to a lot of people, you are really well known for doing a lot of live events. You've done the Super Bowl, you've done, games, you've done TV. Can you talk about, because that is a different skill set than being in a controlled environment working with a band musically. What, first of all, I guess, what drew you to that world? And second of all, can you talk about some of the challenges that you face when you're doing a big live event like that?
Well, it's, I gained those skills, at the record plant. As I said, there were 2 remote trucks. Well, no, there were more than that in those days. But the record plant had 4 remote trucks. So we were out on the road recording live performances. Studio C burned down, which is the studio that I probably worked in. I probably did, I don't know, maybe 70% of the biggest records that I had worked on as an engineer. And when that burned down in the fire, we didn't have any options. So we took remote trucks to different houses. The Babies we recorded in a house in Hidden Hills. We did the Babies in also UFO. We did in a postal station in Beverly Hills. We took the truck to a lot of different places. So I was comfortable sitting in a truck and understood the acoustics of a truck, and certainly it's, when you're in there, it's a different environment than being in the studio. And I approached all these live gigs as a performance. I didn't just sit there and get the great sounds. I actually mixed them. What I would do is that I would map the song out down to the second. I knew, on some of these things, I knew exactly when one guitar player was going to be doing a solo. So I would raise it up, in the instance of, Aerosmith, when it went to a guitar solo, I wrote the solo. When it came to, a vocal bit, I would, raise the vocal. And I just got into the performance, and at the end of it, you sit back after the performances are done or after the event goes live, and we're talking live, straight to satellite. You just feel really good about it because you're in the moment and you're there as a part of the band, mixing that thing live. So I hope that answers your question. It's not so specific, but I had a comfort level being in the trucks because I had spent so much time in them. And, I really enjoy mixing live. Front of house, forget about it. I would never do it. But in a truck, in that environment, put me in there, Coach.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. And yet they're both live things, but they're 2 different approaches.
Two different animals.
Yeah, two totally different animals. What is it about the front of house, the working in like a theater or whatever? What is that is just not for you?
I had done it once when I was in Illinois. There was a very big rock band called the Finchley Boys out of Champaign-Urbana. And I thought, I want to be a live mixer, not understanding what the hell it was. And I got to the gig, set it up, and I had to deal with feedback and PA and all of that stuff. And after one show, I called it quits. I just didn't like it. It just wasn't for me. I liked maybe the comfort and control that I had being in the studio.
Yeah, it's a much more controlled environment. Mike, I want to talk about another thing that I don't think a lot of people know with regards to you, and that is that you and your wife have a charity called The Song of My Own, and I'm wondering if you could tell us what that is and what inspired it.
Well, I mean, it really was my wife's baby, and she's all about giving back. In fact, nowadays she's the director of development for the Children's Burn Foundation here in Los Angeles. So she's always been very philanthropical, and she thought, how can I help people and incorporate my husband into this? And so it was such a gratifying situation to be able to go to Children's Hospital, and some of these kids, the prognosis was absolutely dire, and to be able to give them something to look forward to every week, where I would bring an artist in to write a song with them. And some of these kids were very creative, and other kids, it was they not so creative. And we recorded kids face down on a gurney. We recorded kids who would only be able to write the lyrics because they're in clean rooms where even their parents weren't allowed to go into the rooms without getting into a suit so that they couldn't contaminate the areas. So it gave the kids something to really look forward to, and it was an amazing project that we had. And what happened is that at Children's Hospital, the Lance Armstrong Foundation took over the program from us. And we're talking about, and it kind of didn't go anywhere after that. So, actually, we're talking about resurrecting it on, our grassroots level once again. But it was so satisfying for every artist that I brought in there to do it. I mean, they all were very hesitant of walking into a hospital, but when it was all over and the song was delivered, they all agreed that it was a life-changing experience for them, and did as much for them as it did for the kids in the hospital.
That's fantastic. What advice to up-and-coming producers, people that listen to our show, would you give them?
Oh God, that's the one question I wasn't prepared for. I think that, talking about, some of the things, reflecting back on some of the things that we had talked about earlier, is that, as a producer, make sure that you can add value to the song and to the project, number one. Number two, do it for all the right reasons. When I started in this business, I never thought about the success that I would have on a financial level. I always thought of it as a creative, how I'm going to, affect someone's life creatively. And I think that you have to go into it, that way, thinking that, you're going to create something that people will enjoy, hopefully timelessly, as opposed to, I'm in it for the money and I'm gonna make X amount of dollars on this. And lastly, serve the song, because if you serve the song, you're ultimately gonna serve the artist. And that's their calling card. That is the business card that every artist has, is their song.
In your experience, are there any books or videos that you recommend people watch who are interested in producing records? Are there any, things that have made an impact on you that you've enjoyed throughout your career that you can recommend?
What, hey, Rich, why are you bringing up the hard questions at the end? This is, it's interesting. I was in my, I had a little library in the house full of different books. And I was thinking yesterday, in anticipation of this interview, when I started at the record plant, what books did I have at my disposal to be able to read. And I think after they knew that I was going to be serious about a career as an assistant engineer, that they gave me a recording, I think it was recording techniques, and they gave me a tweaker as well. But nowadays there's just so many books and so many opportunities to troll the internet and to find out different things. So I guess that's just like what it was when I was sitting behind all of these talented individuals, to be able to watch a show like this or listen to a podcast like this, and to be able to glean some of the things that you feel are important, or things that you might not want to do from that. But as far as recording technique, I think nothing can replace actually getting in there and real life exposure to those situations. But specifically, different books, I can't name any off the top of my head. And I typically don't read the biographies or autobiographies of artists, because it's their perception of what happened in the studio, and typically they don't remember, or it's a little self-serving about to themselves about what happened in the studio. So all of the above, podcast and YouTube videos and books, they're all out there, some better than others. So I don't have a real clear vision of a particular book to read.
Have you ever seen any of because as you were speaking about this, I was thinking one of the things, and I'm not a producer, but I'm interested in that field and I find it fascinating. But one of the things that I was wondering if you'd ever watched are any of the classic album series of these special, documentaries that really go into depth about how one album was made. Usually it's with the producer, the band, and the engineer, and you get to break down the tracks, you get to hear how things were recorded, and they've done some great ones over the years. I wondered if you'd ever seen any of those.
I've seen a couple of those. And as I said, yes, those are probably some of the best, representations of what you can learn from that situation, especially if they have everybody there, especially if they have the engineer, the producer, and the artist there to talk about it. You get everybody's perspective on how that record was made. I mean, to that point, absolutely, those are real pinpoint learning experiences that kind of break down the making of a record. However, a lot of times records are not made like that anymore, but you can always learn from the past.
Right. Okay.
Fantastic. So flipping the advice question around now, what advice would you give to up-and-coming artists?
I would say know who you want to be as an artist, and be true to yourself. I always say that, there's different kinds of music to be made. There's disposable music, but I think in order to be successful as an artist, that you have to affect people and listeners, your audience, on an emotional level. You have to be able to affect people in an emotional way, for them to be able to hear a song and musically affect the way they hear things, and lyrically and vocally be able to really move people. And I think that if you can do that, you are going to be successful as an artist.
What is the best way for people to reach you? Should they reach out to your manager if they have an interest in working with you on a project?
That's absolutely the best way. I mean, I get so many robocalls that I don't even pick up my phone if I don't recognize it. Email. So, to go through my management company, Frank McDonough Management, that's absolutely the best way. Because, I mean, he filters everything and can, speak to an artist and help them understand, what it is, their realistic expectations. I mean, someone may come and say, hey, I want Mike Clink to do a record for, 10 songs for $2,000. Well, that's just not going to happen. But on the other hand, I'm not looking for $1 million to make a record. So, he is able to give someone a realistic expectation of whether or not it would work. But listen, I love giving back and I love helping. If it's something that hits me on an emotional level, I will get involved with it, even if it's not a boatload of money. I mean, I have worked in the studio many, many times for nothing, so that, people, it depends on what they want to do. But if they want to raise money for a charity, I'll give them, a couple days of my time in order to, raise money for a charity. And I've done different things like that. So, I mean, long answer to, call Frank McDonough.
Wonderful. Mike, I really can't thank you enough. I'm so honored that you were willing to do this, and I deeply, deeply appreciate it. We both do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike.
Well, guys, I really enjoyed it. It was fun. I really had a good time. So thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to hear that. Wow. What a great interview. What a really great interview, Yeah. I mean, what was interesting, Eric, is right when he started, I love the fact that he talked about he chose the career of production as a young kid.
Instinctively, yeah. Like, instead of being, most musicians or most people that fall in love with music want to be in front. They want to be on stage. They want to be a performer. But he instinctively knew that he wanted to be behind the scenes. And that's
the record.
Rare. It's extremely rare.
Yes, absolutely. Especially at that age.
Yeah.
And he talked about how, all of his disposable income as a child.
I think he said he knew he wanted to be behind the scenes. He just knew he did not want to be in front, which is great. I mean, that's just very unusual.
It is, but yet it goes to, I think, a lot of people in life. I find it's interesting, when you talk to people as much as we do, you get a sense over the period of time of speaking with them. Some really knew from a very early age who they were and what they wanted, and their path and their destiny, if you want to call it that.
Right.
And that is something that I've seen. I mean, whether it was Barbra Streisand who has talked about that, she didn't know the mechanics, but she always knew. Mike Clink always knew he wanted to be behind the scenes,
Madonna was another one that just really had that one track.
Exactly. They just knew. And it's, it's that kind of focus, that kind of like innate sense. So that was a very interesting thing. The other thing that I think was really fascinating about Mike, and I have a lot of great admiration for his production and for his skills and work, and especially the way that he came up. He came up in an era when you worked at studios with a lot of great people. He spoke about all of those
He apprenticed with a lot of incredible Andy Johns, Rod Nevison. I mean,
yes, and
the who's who.
Not only the who's who, but the volume of projects that he got to do. I think he mentioned something like 200 albums, 200 projects, not completely all the way through, but 200 before he started producing records.
And what I loved is that he picked up something from each one of those productions that he kind of tucked away and started to realize that's what I would do, that's what I won't do. And he, in turn, created those skill sets. So when he started producing, he already knew what he would do and what he wasn't going to do. He saw what was working, what wasn't working. And I think that's sorely missed now in today's era, where you don't have that kind of apprenticeship and that kind of system where you can go into a studio. It happens, but it's just very rare now because everybody's now in their own silos recording from home. So I guess you're learning as you go on your own, but you don't have that apprenticeship where you can go in there and see somebody that's at a top level and look at what's working and what's not working, and this is what I would do, and no, this is not what I would do in this situation.
It's much more rare, I think. And part of the reason is because the kinds of facilities that facilitate, if you don't mind the pun, that kind of opportunity of learning
Right.
are few and far between today.
Yep.
The East-Wests, the record plants, those kinds of things where big projects come in, where you would get that chance. Now, technology, remember, that was the only game in town in the era that Mike was doing it, in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
That was it. You didn't have home studios back then.
Right.
Certainly not ones where pros made records.
Right.
But now we live in a world where
everybody's making records from their house,
So there isn't that opportunity. You learn those skills kind
as
of on
you
your
go.
own.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's another big part of it. But the other thing that I really loved about it, just sort of going off on your point, was he really learned a lot about people skills. And he talked about that a lot, which I thought was really interesting. The importance of getting people or the artists that he worked with to perform to the maximum of their potential. That's really what it's all about. Getting the great
performances. Yeah, and I think he was talking about after he did the pre-production, and once you got the lyrics and the music and the arrangements, everything was together, then it was just, like what he said, all about people skills, because he had to... he's like the cheerleader cheering them on to get them the best performances possible. And I guess that's what you want to do with any artist. So I found it very interesting how he was talking about that, how important it is having those people skills and being able to get those great performances, which, like you said, it's absolutely crucial.
It's not only crucial, it's what I think adds to why he was so successful. We talked in the interview about Guns N' Roses.
Right. Talk about performances. Talk about
when he got them. He was the fourth guy.
Yeah.
And whoever the three other people, which were unmentioned, it didn't work. For whatever reason, what they needed and what they wanted wasn't gelling. It wasn't
band,
there.
And I think the whole, Tom and everybody involved, Alan Niven, everybody that was involved, I think they knew instinctively, and especially the band, they knew they wanted that raw kind of sound.
And they weren't getting it.
And, and I believe in the interview when he talked, they said that they really loved the work that he did with UFO, and how they said, we want more of that, not, necessarily the Survivor side of things. And I thought another great thing that I picked up about that section of our interview was that I thought that it was something that's rare that you obviously don't see in today's era, but that the label and the entire team, they did not want to let go of that project. They decided to keep going with it because they knew instinctively, even after the three producers and they weren't getting the results that they wanted, they still knew at the end of the day that this was a very special project and they wanted to see it through. They knew that they had something very special with Guns N' Roses.
Yes, and and to their credit, they knew when they didn't have it.
Exactly.
They didn't settle.
Right.
Like, okay, well, whatever, we'll get it next time.
Exactly.
And that's a mark of, when you look behind the scenes and you pull apart any usually great piece of work, you will always find stories like that.
Right.
The difficulty, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always the same kind of difficulty, but great albums in history. I mean, Who's Next?
Right.
One of the great albums of all time was the result of an absolute catastrophic disaster of a project that completely fell apart. And all they were left with was the 8 songs.
Exactly.
And my God, and the rest is history. But, from the ashes came this phenomenal piece of work.
And we've heard that time after time with so many albums that were, turning out to be disasters, and they ended up somehow...
Or there were such difficult,
rumors
and the problems going on there. I've read interviews with Paul McCartney, one of his finest albums, which is Band on the Run, and the absolute, unbelievable problems. He recorded some of that album in Africa, got there very sick. He was very ill. He was having problems with Linda and his marriage.
U2 coming after Joshua Tree when they did Achtung Baby, God, they almost broke up. I mean, that was a game-changing album. That was a life-altering album.
Achtung Baby?
Achtung Baby.
Yes, where do you go after 15 million sellers and worldwide superstar?
Exactly.
And very much, there's a great documentary that and I'm so glad you mentioned that, called Down from the Sky.
Yes.
If you've never seen it, you guys need to get that documentary. It's not one of the well-known ones of YouTube, but it's so good. It talks about that period of their time when they created that and all of the turmoil. Bono has said in years subsequent, that's what won my favorite U2 song.
That was
that's
the one that saved the record. Yeah,
was
when they had that song, they knew that they had the momentum. Like they're like, okay, we got it. Yeah,
exactly.
That's a brilliant documentary. I suggest everybody watch.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
You know, and I think one of the other things that I really liked about the interview was, you know, when it came to advice. Knowing that you want to be as an artist and being true to that. And one of the other points that I really loved is that he's saying that to become a successful artist, you have to really strike a nerve, both emotionally and viscerally to the listener, that you have to strike them in such a way that that's how they're going to, you know, in turn fall in love with you as an artist. And I thought that was a really great point that he made.
I did too. And I thought what's interesting about it is that requires you knowing who you are as an artist. And it's remarkable. You know, a lot of times people don't give that a lot of thought, you know, who they are, what they want to convey, what they're about, where they're coming from.
Right.
And if you look at some of your favorite artists in life, whether it's, you know, The Who or, you know, U2, it doesn't matter, Springsteen, whoever. These are, I mean, I'm just picking three, you know, great examples of people who really know who they are. That's a very, very important quality. That's a very important factor in achieving that and being true to that. And we've even seen over the years, you know, when artists, not that they can't experiment, but when they deviate off, you know, as to trying something else that isn't really them.
Right.
Often they have results that are commensurate with it not being them.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I thought it was a great point that he brought up, and I think it's something that everybody should be listening to. And what a great interview!
Great interview. Again, he's one of the greats. One of the true greats.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor. Show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.